Good morning, everyone. The night that my dad was dying, I sat on a plane with my 7-month-old baby on my lap, and I looked out the window. It wasn't hard to notice that the plane next to me was headed to a much different destination. The plane itself was completely decked out with exciting paint that let everyone know this plane was headed to Disneyland. I couldn't help but think about how much I wish I was on that plane, how much I wish I could hop on it right that moment and fly literally away from what was happening in my life. But let's back up before we dive into that. I grew up in Saskatchewan on the prairies, in a town that's so small, technically it's a village. My parents divorced when I was about 4 years old. Their story isn't my story to tell, but I'll just say it was messy. Despite that, I actually do feel like I had a good childhood. I ran wild and free. I grew up playing with friends, having fun. I was surrounded by extended family. I was close with my brother. I was generally happy most of the time. But I also grew up feeling torn between my two parents who never spoke, and I was sometimes literally the messenger between them. There was alcoholism, loud fights, divorce, lack of communication or expression of emotions, a stay in a shelter, social worker visits, court dates, mind games, blended families, just a lot of broken people trying to figure out how to do this thing called life, and all without God. High school was a tumultuous, emotional time for me, as it is for many teenagers who are trying to navigate their way through high school with changing hormones and trying to figure out where they fit in this world. I was so overwhelmed by my life and by my pain, I wondered what was the point of life and why was I even born. By grade 9, I'd begun to self-injure, which continued until my first year of university. By grade 10, I added in disordered eating for about a year, and I took any opportunity I had to party and drink or use other substances with my friends. I was miserable. I often thought of ending it all. After I graduated, I started to feel a sense of wanting something more from life. I sensed that there must be something more, but I didn't know what to do with that because I didn't want to go to church. But in my first year of university, a friend of mine who was getting baptized invited me to come and witness it. Choosing to be a supportive friend, I went with her. I started coming to church after that. I joined a small group, and for the first time in my life, I saw people actually caring about their spirituality, believing in God, and working to live it out in their everyday lives. Between seeing this, being welcomed into such a loving community, and Jesus' teachings, my life changed forever. I decided to be baptized the day that I first heard about the Holy Spirit. I'm chronically indecisive, and so the idea of relying on the Holy Spirit to guide me sounded amazing. I was baptized soon after that, but I spent the summer feeling quite alienated and misunderstood by my friends. I just felt really alone because I hadn't quite yet made close friends in my new church, but I was really different now from my old friends, and I didn't really know where I fit anymore. Satan found this a prime opportunity and pounced on my vulnerability. Not for the first time, and not for the last time. I spent the first couple of months post-baptism partying more than I ever had before until the day it all became very clear to me what God had done for me. And I decided that I was ready and I wanted to give it all back to him. Peter and I had been dating for about 9 months by then, and I told him that I was going all in for God. He could either join me or not. He chose to join me. Everyone thinks that, because he grew up in a Christian family, that he converted me, but it's the other way around. He chose to join me, and from there on, we just jumped right in on this roller coaster of following the Spirit wherever he led us. It's not that I never doubted in all these years since I became a Christian. Sure, I've had moments of doubt or wondering, what did I get myself into? But they're very short-lived doubts. I trusted God, and my faith continued to grow. Fast forward now to my dad's diagnosis. This was his second cancer diagnosis in 3 years, and it came just shortly after Eleanor was born. This was the bad one, the final one, the one where they say it's in the bones and it's terminal. I was determined, though, that I would stay strong. Do you know the story of Daniel, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were literally faced with death, and not just any death, literally being burned in a furnace if they did not bow down to other gods. But they stood firm, saying, our God will rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we won't bow down to your gods. I told myself, yes, I will remain faithful, even if this doesn't go the way I like. I clung to this summary of Daniel chapter 3, and if not, God is still good. And yet, 1 week after my father passed away, I found myself wondering if this was all true what I'd given my life to, and if it was even worth it at all. The devil saw this as another opportunity to pounce on my vulnerability, and this would be the worst attack yet. I can honestly say I've never felt such confusion, fear, and hopelessness as I did during these last 2 years. I knew that I still believed in God, but I stopped believing God. I stopped believing that he was good. I stopped believing that he loved me, and I started to believe the devil and all the horrible things that he was whispering into my heart. It affected my marriage. It affected who I was as a mother, who I was as a Christian, and as the wife of a pastor. Many of my feelings from my teenage years resurfaced, that overwhelming pain and loathing. Though I did not engage my thoughts by acting on them, thoughts of self-injury were often there, and it took all of my energy to fight them off. Leaving this world crossed my mind more often than I would like to admit. One night I lay in my bed after all of my family fell asleep. I cried and I battled the very real thoughts of getting in my car and driving away from it all, knowing it would be hours before anyone would even know that I was gone. These are real thoughts, heavy and crushing. I found myself crying often, feeling angry over simple things asked of me, over the simple fact that my children needed something from me. I was their mother after all. Of course they need something from me, but I was unable to give any more at that point. And then the overwhelming feelings of shame would come over me because even though I wanted to run away, even though I was angry and I was sad, I really did love my family, and I knew that I had so many things to be thankful for, but I just didn't feel thankful, and that made me feel awful. People tried to encourage me and tell me to keep praying or to trust, and honestly, it was all I could do to not roll my eyes at them. I have prayed like once a day. I still go to church. I serve. I'm in a small group. Sometimes I even get up early to pray and read my Bible, and I have a special worship playlist. Does God not see my special worship playlist? And yet, I do not feel him. In fact, I feel abandoned. Abandoned during the most painful time in my entire life. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick," and I was seeing real-life evidence that this was really dangerously true. I desperately wanted to believe God and to be my old self again, but every time I got a shred of faith, the devil came in with 10 more doubts. This past summer, I reread The Practice of the Presence of God. If you haven't read this humble yet powerful little book, I can sum it up for you right now in just a few seconds. Pray without ceasing, think about God all the time, and if you find yourself not thinking about God, don't worry about it, just start thinking about him again. I was skeptical. It seemed way too simple. And of course, Brother Lawrence, who wrote the book, could do this. He was a monk, for crying out loud. I bet he didn't have 4 kids interrupting his thoughts every 2 seconds or a million things to do in the monastery. But I started to try it out, thinking about God as much as I could, offering simple prayers of, "Help me, God. Just help me." Or, "Thank you, God." Or, "Wow, God." Just some examples. And day by day, I've been able to see the good in my life again. I felt heart wounds begin to heal. I felt his presence in my life again. I can hear the truth again. I have joy again. And I have hope again. Life is not suddenly perfect, but I'm starting to have all of these things again because of him. You know, over the last 2 years, there's a word that kept coming up, and I kept ignoring it because I really didn't know what to do with it in my pain. That was abide. Kept coming up, abide in me. Like I said, I wasn't sure what to do with it, and besides, I was pretty sure that he just wanted me to abide in him so that he could get me to do more stuff for him. And I was pretty much done with that because I kind of felt like all I've been doing lately is stuff for you, and none of it's been easy. I drag 4 kids everywhere. I come to church days after giving birth. I go to church retreats 37 weeks pregnant. We planted a church. We left a solid church family to do that and start something very fragile. And also choosing to follow God in a family where nobody follows God, where it's actually kind of looked down upon to follow God, made me the black sheep in my own family, which singled me out and made me big weirdo, quite frankly, to my family. It's really hard to handle every time that I'm with them, just feeling very separate from them. My family of origin seemed to be falling apart at that time. Then my dad passed away. All of that happened while I was close to God. So yeah, I kind of felt like I was done with that for now, and I was going to try to handle it myself. But God, man, I am lucky He is such a loving and patient God who could see my pain and waited like the most loving parent for me. He heard me think such adolescent thoughts about Him, equivalent to slamming the door and screaming, "I hate you," like some teenager on a hormonal rampage. But He is all wisdom. He is all love, and He waited patiently, lovingly for me to be able to see. I don't even know yet all the things He's done to carry me through this pain while I beat my fist on His chest, pushing Him away and blaming Him. Through all of this, He continued to pursue me, abide in me. I've continued to wonder all those things, like I said before. How? I've been going to church. I've been in small groups. I've been doing all these things. I've been showing up, God, but where are you? Why won't you come to me? One day I was praying in my bed, just laying there praying. I felt like I should get down on my knees. And I was like, nope, I'm not getting down on my knees. I don't have to get down on my knees. There's no rules about this. Laying here on my bed and praying is just fine. And it is just fine, but in this moment I suddenly felt like God made it very clear to me that I just needed to get down on my knees, not because He was commanding my obedience, but because He wanted me to trust Him. That part I figured out later. He made it clear because though I intended to continue praying on my bed, I soon found out that I couldn't continue praying. No more words were coming. The only thing I could think of was, I have to get down on my knees. Begrudgingly, awkwardly, uncomfortably, I got on my knees. I soon discovered I was able to pour my heart out again. And so I finally asked, why can't I abide in you, God? What does that even mean? I don't get it. I didn't hear a voice or anything, but I felt it very deep in my spirit. You don't abide in me because you're afraid to abide in me. You're afraid to trust me. You're scared of what abiding in me may cost you. And you feel like abiding in me is something that you should do so that you'll be able to produce fruit for me. But I don't need you to produce fruit for me. I can do that all on my own. The only thing I want is your heart. I want you to abide in me, to be with me. And once you do that, you will be able to produce fruit, but not because you have to, because you get to. Well, let me tell you, I came downstairs from that prayer time a little wide-eyed and stunned. As someone who feels valued only by what I'm able to contribute, as someone who's a people pleaser, being asked not to focus on producing, not to want to be with God just so I can pour Him out again, this was going to be a challenge, but also a sweet, sweet relief. God does not want, nor does He need me to do anything. He's got that all covered, but He does want me, my heart, my love, my friendship. I've given birth 4 times, 3 times 100% naturally. I learned about a method where each contraction comes, you focus on keeping your muscles relaxed and breathing through the pain instead of the natural inclination to tense the body up and resist it. Tensing up actually makes it harder, while focusing and breathing is easier on the body. An interesting thing about labor is that when the contractions come, it takes over everything, every thought. Nothing else matters as you curl up in pain, waiting for it all to end. But when it ends, you can talk normally. It's almost as if you aren't in labor at all. As I look back at my life, I can see it in just the same way, a really long labor. Sometimes life is good, sometimes life is very painful. The pain does not discriminate. Everyone experiences it at some point. Some of us have easier labors than others, but we all have the pain. It's equally as part of life as the easy times, but the contraction is what actually progresses the labor. When the pain, and I'm just going to make a little side note here. Last night, Peter said something that he probably doesn't want me to tell you. He's like, oh, a contraction, that sounds a little lighthearted. And I looked at him and I was like, you've obviously never had a contraction unmedicated. This is not a lighthearted thing. Anyways, I digress. When the pain comes into our life, though, we want nothing to do with it. We tense up, we want to run from it, or hop on that Disneyland plane and get out of there. But I discovered that I must embrace the pain to let my body and my heart go with it. I needed to learn to breathe through it. I recently learned that the Hebrew word for breath is the same word that's used for spirit in the Bible. Breath, spirit, same word. I began to think, what if when I choose to breathe through life's contractions, I take in his spirit? His spirit, which John 3:34 says, is given without limit, so I can take as many breaths as I need to be filled up and get through it. What if each breath through the pain I can be given eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to understand? I've just been through the hardest contraction of my life, but do you know what has happened? What finally helped to relieve it? My circumstances have not changed. My dad is still gone. There are things that I've seen that I will never forget, but practicing his presence, trying to breathe his name constantly, to pray without ceasing, this is what has set me free from that dark, harmful place and set me free into the light and into the truth. The contractions will continue to come in my life. This labor isn't over. But I have hope that when my labor is done, it will give birth to a beautiful new life in heaven where pain and sorrow will be no longer. May you practice God's presence as you go through your days, and may you breathe his spirit in. May you breathe it in deeply.